I've been told to find the big green button to get started. Pleasure to be here. My name's Daniel Haslam. I'm Director of Operational Integrity. That's Transocean's term for process safety and HSE. And today I'm proud to present our award-winning WorkSight assurance and verification process. Let's just get out ahead of that. I think the best way to talk through this journey is to talk through our journey of our conversation around what defines safety. So to use Lamberto's term, do we sit and wait? So this is our traditional measures of safety, total recordable incident rate. It's looking backwards, and we all know that the absence of injuries is no kind of indicator of our future performance. So we choose not to sit and wait. We made that realization towards the end of 2017. So you'll see on the chart there, we actually made it during our best ever year in terms of total recordable incident rate. And we suffered a fatality. It was our last fatality in December 2017, here in the US Gulf of Mexico. And it was on a rig that had just enjoyed 6 months with a rolling total recordable incident rate of 0. So these unpredictable high consequence events happen to our rigs that appear to be performing safely when we just look at incidents. So what we choose to focus on now is the presence of safeguards. We didn't use that terminology back in 2017, but it's proven to be the foundation of what we call WorkSight today. So over the next few slides, I'll show you what WorkSight is. I'll explain the principles. I'll tell you what you might see if you went out to a Transocean rig, how you'd see it being operationalized out on deck. I hope to give you some success cases of how we've seen it bleed through to an improvement in our lagging results. And then I'll do a bit of a grand reveal at the end. How has it driven our lagging results? Because ultimately, have we seen the benefit on the downstream side? So what is WorkSight assurance and verification? When I'm talking to my crews about this, I kick off by talking about the safety triangle, Heinrich triangle. But we know that our past performance is no indicator of our future performance when it comes to incidents and injuries. But it's a good model because it helps me kind of carry them through to what WorkSight does for us. So within that set of injuries and incidents, there's a subset that we stole shamelessly from ExxonMobil. I know there's some ExxonMobil people in the room. It's called mining the diamond. So you have to accept that the most valuable learnings are going to come from our highest level incidents and injuries, the fatalities, the serious injury cases. They were too costly. We can't avoid to learn from them. But there's also valuable learnings down in the first aid cases, down in the near hits. They're actually the best learnings if you're a continuous improving organization. They're the cheap ones. You want to grab them, you want to scale them. So by extension, we carry that down into the presence of safeguards. What WorkSight's doing is actually focusing on the behaviors, the conditions, that we know from our data need to be present or not present to get the good safety results up top. And like on the lagging side, we've got a subset of WorkSight findings that sit in there that have the most concentrated value. And I'll explain a little bit more about why I believe they sit there when I explain the 3 elements that are in WorkSight. But it doesn't actually look like that. It looks more like that. So last year, 2022, we had around 2,600 more learnings through our WorkSight program than we had incidents and injuries throughout the fleet. So 2,600 more opportunities to learn something, to self-correct, and to hopefully avoid subsequent incidents or injuries out on our rigs. But nothing bad has happened in WorkSight. There's been no bang on deck. There's been no injury as such. The term I use in my teams offshore, it was a conversation. That's all it was. It was a conversation. Up at the top, the lagging indicators, that's an investigation. What we want to have is as many conversations as we can, and we control how many of those we have to avoid the investigations. That's the whole principle behind WorkSight. When we started this journey, and no surprise to everybody in the room, our teams offshore kind of contribute to safety in different ways. And that drove us to creating 3 elements within WorkSight so that we could squeeze the most value out of how they contribute to safety. The first element we call engage. It's our behavioral-based safety process. I heard Equinor talk about it in the room earlier. It's kind of table stakes. This is where our junior crews, our service partners, invest their time. Basically, anybody that's not going to play in any of the higher levels of WorkSight. We administer it purely digital now. And what we do is we challenge our teams to go focus on those activities that we know are high risk. So it's directed. We don't want them looking at things that are not high risk. And we see it in our data and we change it dynamically. When they tell us what they're looking at, we deliver them some observable behaviors or conditions that, again, from our data and industry data, we know need to be present in order to get safe outcomes. And as we learn, as we see hotspots around the rig from our lagging results and also from our WorkSight leading results, we're going to direct people to focus on new areas so that they can stamp out those fires before they start to spread. Our next element is called coach. That's where our frontline leaders spend their time, our working supervisors. And what we ask them to do is focus on line of fire hazards and line of fire controls. We heard about line of fire this morning from Joe. It's the single biggest source of our incidents and injuries offshore. It has been for the longest time. I'm not sure I ever see it going away. Coach, again, is delivered digitally. And it's highly visual. We grab learnings. We'll grab incidents that we've had on other rigs, and in near real time, we're able to share those back out to our entire fleet. So we're scaling that pain, that learning from one rig, and allowing every other rig to have powerful conversations around line of fire hazards with their teams out on deck. And we only ask one question. Have a look at this incident, talk to your teams. Was their understanding about the controls good, or was additional coaching required? And what we're looking for them to do is drive towards additional coaching being required. And the final element that we've got in WorkSight is called confirm. That's where our senior rig leadership spend their time. And what we ask them to look at are our critical requirements, and it's also the most, or the least subjective. There's a fair bit of subjectivity sits in engage and coach, but in confirm, they're either perfect in their application of that requirement, or they're not. And we strongly encourage our teams to don't go look to verify everything is good, go look to verify that maybe it's not. Identify those weak signals. So through confirm, we get 3 things. Firstly, our senior rig leadership, we push our requirements across them regularly. So they get exposed to them and they truly learn them. Not just the craft of them, their belief of how they're applied, they actually get the true requirement. WorkSight gives them a framework for them to go test the understanding of their teams on that requirement out in the field. And then at the same time, as they're testing the health of that safeguard, if there's a weak signal, they can celebrate it and coach it out of our business right there and then. So those are the 3 elements. In each element, we give our guys, our teams offshore, a way to identify weak signals. In engage, it's if we have an intervention versus a reinforcement. In coach, it's if additional coaching was provided. And in confirm, it's if there were any requirements that had weaknesses. So it's kind of that simple. And across our fleet every day, we do more engage observations than we do coaching conversations. And we do more coaching conversations than we have confirm verifications. So that's kind of how the numbers work offshore. We've developed dashboards from this data for our teams, because what we can measure, we know we can improve. And there's 3 trends that we see from the dashboards, 3 very compelling trends. Here's the first one. Rigs that find things to fix, so identify weak signals, get better safety results. And we can draw a very neat line between those leading results and the lagging results. Rigs that have broad participation in WorkSight get better safety results. So the hazards exist day and night. The hazards exist at a process safety level as well as at an occupational safety level. So we have to have breadth and we have to have depth. And the third thing we see from the dashboards are teams that engage with them, and I get to see all of the clicks. I can see who's working in the dashboards. They're using them to tell stories. They're using them to redirect their teams. Directionally, they get better safety results as well. So those are the 3 kind of compelling trends that we've seen consistently over the last 2 years since we've been running this program. And they're pretty easy levers to pull on to direct our teams. So if you go out to a Transocean rig, what would it look like when you see people using WorkSight out on deck? I'll draw you to the image on the top right. For Engage, because that's our high volume process, most of our Engage observations are captured after the fact on self-service kiosks that we have around the rig. Some in hazardous areas outside on deck, some within the accommodation. Now, what we lose in our people not having the prompts in front of them as they're having that BBS conversation, we more than gain back through the fact that we can manage the content dynamically. So it's not like we have to print off another 10,000 forms to send out to our rigs, so we can change it dynamically overnight. And the results of those Engage observations are available almost immediately in near real time in the dashboards. So we can see where we're investing our time. For Coach and for Confirm, you would see people at the WorkSight interacting with their teams using explosion-proof tablets. Some of them are PDA size, no bigger than a phone. Some are up to a 10-inch screen. So what you're looking at here is a snapshot in time from our hands-on topic within Coach. So we deliver visual content, photographs, typically from our fleet, that will remind people of incidents that have taken place, and we use very simple language. And we ask maybe 4 or 5 questions. At the end of each question, we simply say, frontline leader, what was the level of understanding of your team on deck? Was it good, or was additional coaching provided? You'll see that additional coaching provided is green. Green is good. We learned through A/B testing of this system, rigs that identify weak signals get better safety results, so we want to encourage our teams to be able to find those weak signals. People will chase green. So if they tell us that they've identified additional coaching opportunities, we just ask them to capture them, give us a few words. I'm not too quick at typing in there. It's a screenshot of me having a go at one of these. Our teams offshore, they'll talk into the devices, it captures the language that way, or they can type a lot quicker. We're not looking for stories, we're just looking for a few snapshots. So that's an example of how Coach works. The devices around the rig work both offline and online. So even when you're outside of the shadow of Wi-Fi, they still work fine. When they go back into the accommodation or to an area of the rig where the Wi-Fi picks up, then it's going to grab that WorkSight activity that they did, send it to the cloud, and it's immediately available in the dashboards. So our teams can kind of learn from their participation, learn from what they're finding. So here's an example of the dashboards. They are available to everybody within Transocean, onshore and offshore. And we were very intentional to optimize them such that they run fast offshore, and they do. We use Power BI to administer our dashboards. It's not laggy at all for our teams offshore. If things are slow, if things are painful to click through, we know that's going to be a barrier to entry. So we want to knock those barriers down. We're also able to share our dashboards with our service partners and with our customers. It helps drive one version of the truth. So if we're all telling stories from the same data, if we're all recognizing participation with the same data, it kind of helps build that literacy around WorkSight. And if we, as the consumers of the dashboard, as well as our teams offshore, are literate in WorkSight, we're going to drive more value out of the process. That's what it's about. I don't really know how much value comes from being in the dashboards versus how much value comes from the conversations out on deck. I know there's more on deck, but we still know there's more to be squeezed from people interacting with the data, learning from it, and redirecting. So I'm going to press click, and you'll see the dashboards fly around a little bit. I would ask you, look at the gray bar, which is down in the bottom right near the image of the rig. When I click on confirm, you're going to see that weak signal rate increase. And what that means is, it means our teams in confirm are finding more things to fix. They're identifying more weak signals, which is exactly what we would expect from our senior rig leadership that truly know what good looks like. So the dashboards are pretty quick. That's 6 months of data across the fleet. On that click, I zoomed in on one rig. But you can dig into the individual processes. So here we are in Engage. I'm going to see what our Transocean third parties are focusing on. And you can see it all the way down to the names, the name clouds. People love to chase their names. It's a great way that we've found to build engagement. We also operationalize the IOGP life-saving rules through WorkSight, through Engage. Here I'm going to look at just the intervention observations, not the reinforcements. So you can dig, you can learn, you can help tell stories, give feedback to your teams to drive the behaviors that you want. And this is our confirm dashboard. We can click on the specific requirements that we've asked our teams offshore to check against. And it's going to tell us how often have we tested those requirements. So first of all, you've got to go look to be able to see anything. Then it'll tell us who we've been testing those requirements on, who's actually been doing the confirm verifications, and how many weak signals did we find. So we take feedback from our teams offshore to help tweak the dashboards. There's a lot of data in there, but the changes that we get from our teams, it's not about the data itself. It's about learning from the data, finding quick ways to tell stories, quick ways to inspire our teams to deliver better. And the rule that me and my team hold ourselves to, if it takes more than 5 clicks to tell a story, it's too cute. People aren't going to be doing that. You only want to be 4 or 5 clicks away from a useful story that you can tell in real time to your teams offshore. So an example of how WorkSight has fed through to our lagging results. 0.18, that was Transocean's hand and finger recordable injury rate, total recordable incident rate, at the end of Q2 2022. And from the heat map at the top, you can see there's a big red circle around the hands and fingers. That was where the majority of our recordables were taking place. Let's fast forward a year. Our total recordable incident rate for hands and fingers has reduced by almost 90%. Our fleet count has been fairly consistent across that. So what you'll see from the bars, blue is a first aid, yellow is a recordable. We didn't just manage to impact the consequence of injuries, so we didn't just mitigate, we also reduced our overall number of incidents. So we attacked it on a preventative side as well. So those are exactly the results that we want. How did we do it? Well, it was through a relentless, I think that's the term our teams offshore would use, relentless use of WorkSight Coach, the hands-on topic within WorkSight Coach. By far, that's our most dynamic. We're changing our images, we're changing our stories in that topic almost weekly as we learn so that we can scale those learnings in near real time to all of our rigs. We do about 16,000 a quarter. In real numbers, that's about 7 to 10 per rig per day. And they have a coaching rate of about 20%. So when we see that coaching rate drop off, we know that we need to give them some more content so that they can coach up on something new. So to use the language of Lamberto, we're not going to sit and wait. We're going to find that next incident, and we're going to scale it out to our rig so that they can go sniff for it and test for the health of it. So that's one example. I started talking to our board of directors about this about 4 cycles ago. Previously, I would just talk about lagging results. But now I talk about leading results. It's great, it's much more fun for me, it's a much happier place to be. If we have an emergent issue, I can now tell them I'm going to repurpose WorkSight, and they have confidence that that's going to feed through to the lagging results. That's what helps me. We have something called the Transocean Oscars. It's a once-a-year event. We have an award that's called Rig of the Year that's part of that. We have a scorecard. That scorecard that determines Rig of the Year includes finance, safety, training, maintenance, whole gambit of things. 3 rigs last year got 100% on the scorecard. Those 3 rigs were the top 3 rigs in terms of weak signals identified across the fleet. I couldn't have wished for a better story. There can be only one, though. There can only be one winner. When we knocked the 2 off, for other reasons than WorkSight, the rig that we were left with had the single highest weak signal identification rate across the fleet that year. So great. Shameless self-promotion for WorkSight within Transocean, but now our rigs have learned how to game the system a little bit, so we have to find ways to game them so that we can continue to squeeze value. So a bit of a look back. WorkSight, it focuses on the behaviors, the conditions that we know we need to see in order to get safe outcomes. So it's focusing on the safeguards, it's not focusing on the absence of injuries. It's administered digitally, it's highly dynamic, and as we learn, we're going to change that content so that we can drive our teams to focus on maybe what the next issue is going to be. Because you can only improve what you can measure, we've got dashboards, and we get 3 high-level trends from those dashboards. Who's in Alcoholics Anonymous? I'm not allowed to ask our rig teams that. The first thing is to identify that you've got a problem. Then you can fix it. That's the framework that WorkSight provides. And we're talking about little problems. We're not talking about big problems. It's small incremental stuff. Go find them, self-identify them, and then fix them. Rigs with broad participation get better safety outcomes. So hazards exist 24 hours a day. Those hazards run all the way from process safety to occupational, so the full gambit. It cannot be carried by just a few people. So we want that breadth, and we want that depth of participation. It's not a numbers game. I'm counting clicks, but it's the conversations behind those clicks that truly drive the value. I would reinforce that. And as leadership, that's a mantra that we constantly have to preach. And then rigs that use the dashboards, use the data to feed back to their teams. Nobody likes their work to fall into a black hole. So the clicks that we see in the dashboard are people giving that feedback, change in direction, they get better safety results. So the grand reveal, how did this bleed through to our lagging results? Well, no surprise, I wasn't going to give you a bad story, was I? We're currently enjoying our best total recordable incident rate, sustained total recordable incident rate that we've ever had. But we know that the absence of injuries doesn't mean that tomorrow we're going to have no injuries. So that doesn't give me all of the comfort I need. When we apply a WorkSight lens to it, That's our weak signal identification rate, just for confirm. I focus purely on the element that's administered by our teams offshore that truly know what good looks like. That has continued to climb since we implemented this process. Our last fatality was December 2017. Our last LTI across the fleet was January 2021. So when I see that our teams offshore are finding these small things to fix, I get a lot of more confidence, and my leadership gets a lot more confidence that it's going to be a long time before we suffer any more lagging results at that level within the organization. So that's it. I think I left 4 minutes, 23 seconds for questions.
Hey Dan, Tim People with ExxonMobil. Thank you so much. Very interesting. And my question is, two questions. One, do you require a certain number of engagements per crew, or is it left open to leadership, motivating people to do it?
So my answer is a hard no, and we did a lot of research as we developed Engage. We used to call it START. START was our behavioral-based safety system in the past, which was one start, one card per person per day. I couldn't draw a line between that footprint and the safety results. So all we say is you must participate. And we leave it for our teams offshore to determine what participation looks like. Through the dashboards, we make it easy enough for them to see who is in there and who's not, but it's more about a quality measure. So I'd say you've got to be doing at least a couple a week to show your commitment. If you're completely absent, then that's not enough, but I don't mandate a number. For Engage. For Coach and Confirm, we do. If you're a frontline leader, you're going to do one per day. And if you're a member of the senior rig leadership, you'll do at least one per day. Rig HSE advisors do more.
Thank you. And the other question is really encouraging on the trends. Have you also looked at hypo incidents? And I'm curious if it has had any effect on your hypo
Yes,
rate.
it has. So when we look at our serious near hits, that was one of the first things we tooled WorkSight to do, was to improve our mitigating controls, job by design, as Joe talked about, to really enforce our restricted access controls. We hit that hot and heavy for 6 months through WorkSight, and we were able to see those results feed through to the lagging side. Now we're hitting it more on prevention of, dropped objects are our single biggest source of hypos. We're focusing now on prevention of those dropped objects, and we're starting to see that bleed through to our lagging results as well. But it's the high volume leading stuff that gives me a lot more comfort.
Hi, good morning. Chris Parker, I'm with BP. I've got a question about the confirm component. If you could just provide a little bit more detail about the types of company requirements that they're verifying for. And you mentioned that it's meant to be a little bit more prescriptive and objective, when at the same time we talk about the value in conversations. So how do you keep it prescriptive, and what are the types of things that they're verifying? Is it barrier elements, critical tasks, that type of thing, while still enabling the ability to look at some of those underlying conditions and systems around behaviors that may come through in those conversations?
Yeah, good question. So it is directed. We know we can't boil the ocean, so we'll typically have 10 policy requirements that we kind of rotate through Confirm. We focus on the life-changing stuff, so confined space entry, isolations, though we have some broader ones such as our safe work practices. The questions that we ask our teams to verify, it's almost verbatim language from those requirements. So you either see it or you don't. If you don't see it, then we call it a weak signal, and the expectation is you have a coaching conversation to raise the game whilst capturing a little bit of the understanding as to why was that gap there. Our teams can then use the dashboards to kind of pull all those gaps together to see if it's training, lack of understanding, all of those kinds of things. But we focus on where we see the most potential. I think my time's up. Thank you so much.